Hello, everyone. My name is Jenna Weiss, and I'm the Manager of Public Programs at the Jewish Museum. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this conversation, featuring writers Edmund de Waal and Adam Gopnik to celebrate the launch of de Waal's latest book, Letters to Camondo. We would like to thank the Rita J. and Stanley H. Kaplan Foundation, whose generous endowment support makes the Saul and Gladys Gwirtzman Lecture possible each year. Now I would like to introduce our speakers. Edmund de Waal is an artist who has exhibited in museums and galleries around the world. His best-selling memoir, The Hare with Amber Eyes, has won numerous prizes, been translated into 29 languages, and will be the subject of a forthcoming exhibition at the Jewish Museum later this year. His previous work, The White Road, A Journey into the History of Porcelain, was published in 2015. Adam Gopnik has been writing for The New Yorker since 1986. He is the recipient of 3 National Magazine Awards, both for essays and for criticism, and also of the George Polk Award for magazine reporting. In March of 2013, Gopnik was awarded the Medal of Chevalier of the Order of Arts and Letters by the French Republic. It is my pleasure to welcome them to present this conversation.
So I've written another book. It's called Letters to Camondo, and we start in the Rue de Monceau in the 8th arrondissement of Paris, which is probably where we all want to be. And it's on this particular extraordinary hill of golden houses, all built in the 1860s and 1870s on the edge of this very beautiful park, all built, including this wonderful house, by people and families who've come from all over Europe to settle in the most civilized, glorious city in Europe, in Paris. And on this city of extraordinary people is my family, the Afroussi family that came from Odessa and lived in the Rue de Monceau. And then 10 houses down is this house, the Musée Nissim de Camondo. Jewish family that has come from Constantinople, but bankers like my own family, who arrive in exactly the same year, 1869, and build themselves an extraordinary house. And this is where we start. You walk down this street, you come to these great gates, you walk across this great courtyard, and you find yourself in a fantasy, almost like the Petit Trianon, a beautiful golden poised house. You walk slightly to the left across the crunching gravel, you open this door, and there's this extraordinary staircase, gilded staircase. You could be in the Frick. You walk up this staircase, or you turn left and left again to the Escalier de Service, and you find this metal staircase going up into the 5th floor, into the attics, into all the old servants' quarters, and that's where you need to go. This is where I've been spending my time, up on the top floor of the Musée Nissim de Camondo. And it's here in these deserted rooms, some of them completely empty, some of them just with traces of the furniture left behind by the servants. You open one cupboard and it's full of trunks from Louis Vuitton, another full of broken light fittings from the 1920s. And then you open another door and you find you're in the archives. They are absolutely astonishing archives. They are hunting records and banking records and wills with codicils, records of acquisitions from the man who lived here, the Comte Moise de Camondo. You find letters to everyone, everything stamped with received and the date. You find extraordinary details. You find letters from Proust. And here in these archives, you begin to test what it is that's going on. Why did this man keep every single scrap of paper? Why so much information in these penumbrous rooms on the top of this extraordinary house on the Rue de Monceau? This is a family that comes from Constantinople. Here is the Camondo steps in Istanbul. This is the first house they built in that extraordinary street. It is a monstrosity, says Zola. It's got a bastard eclecticism, he says, rudely. Everyone is rude about these Jewish families on this house. And when you see the pictures of the interiors which Moise grew up in, here is a photograph of the house, you see why. It's eclecticism taken to its dangerous degree. And this is the house that suddenly makes me realize I know what we're talking about. This is so similar to the house of my own assimilated Jewish family on the Ringstrasse in Vienna. This is eclecticism gone wild. And this is the house that he grows up in. And when his parents have died, he does what any good Jewish child shall do. He pulls the house down. He sells off every single stick of furniture in the house. I have the sale catalogues here from where he anatomizes every single object. Everything Ottoman goes into the sale rooms. And this young man, here he is with this raffish black eye from a hunting accident, the man who loves speed, he loves motor cars, he loves racing, he loves the good things in life, decides to get rid of that inheritance, to make himself more purely Parisian in this assimilated street. And what he does is, of course, to marry the proper Jewish girl from the neighboring clan, the clan d'Anvers. And here she is, the young Irene, painted by Renoir, commissioned, curated and arranged by my cousin, Charles Frussy, who lives a few doors along. And he marries this young woman. They have two children, Beatrice and Nissim, and then she runs off with the hunting, with the stable master, Gentile. The end of the marriage. And they have another little girl. So there is Moise. Here he is with his children. He builds himself a house. He builds himself this extraordinary house on the edge of the Parc Monceau. And when you go into this house and you see the staircases and you feel these extraordinary moments where he's trying to create a house in which the most pure and civilized furniture and furnishings and tapestries of the 18th century are brought together, you understand what he's doing. He's saying that he wants to build a house which talks to that moment in French society, 1791, when Jews are given citizenship, the first country in Europe that gives full citizenship for the Jews. He wants to make a house which will be full of conversation, where Voltaire can walk through the door. And he does that with great panache. You walk around this house, you see the furniture and the fittings, and you understand exactly what he's doing in these rooms. He's making a particular house for a particular moment. Here is his extraordinary library. And what he's doing is to create a sense, a space where his Parisianness, this identity, can be held up against the mirror of anti-Semitism. The street is full of noise. Every time he opens the papers, it's full of Drumont, the anti-Semitic leader of the press, excoriating him, the Camondo, for not belonging, for being vile, for being vermin, for not being pure, for not being French, for speaking with the wrong accent. And here in this house, with these beautiful rooms and with these extraordinary servants' quarters, which are filtered all the way through the house, in these extraordinary rooms where he can produce these meals, where he can invite the gratin, he can invite all these different people to sit around his table. This is where he brings up his beautiful two children. Nissim, who of course joins the French army on the first day he can during the Great War. Here he is on leave with Beatrice, and here is Nissim sitting on leave with his devoted father in the back garden of the house in Camondo. And what happens? Nissim is killed. Nissim is killed in 1917. His plane goes down over the German front. And Moise is taken apart. This is the house he built for his son. It becomes a memorial. Overnight, he becomes a person of grieving and mourning. He turns his son's rooms into memorial rooms. He withdraws into these spaces. Here is his table in a porcelain room that he creates so he can be alone. And he decides that this house he's putting together is going to become a memorial which he will give to France in honor of his father and his son, Musée Nissim de Camondo. And his daughter Beatrice marries another good Jewish boy. He's my grandmother's cousin, Leon Reinach, a young composer. He's the scion of this extraordinary father, Theodor Reinach, and Nefrissi. They are great intellectuals. They've built on the banks of the Mediterranean this extraordinary villa, Villa Kerylos, a fantasy of Greek living. And here, this young family grow up before they take themselves off to live next to the Bois de Boulogne in more comfortable circumstances, leaving Moise. And this is the house he lives in. And this is the house he dies in, this beautiful, beautiful house. And then 1935, he gives it to France in his will. And there's a great ceremony in that beautiful courtyard you see on the gravel when the house is given to France. Beatrice has given over an inheritance in gratitude. Everyone is grateful for being Parisian. And it's a great success. The press is full of this gift. And the opening hours are extended in that same year. This beautiful house belonging to Leon's father, Villa Kerylos, is also given over to France. More gratitude. And you know what happens next. And you know that in 1940, that Paris is declared a free city, and the next day that the Wehrmacht walks in. And Leon and Beatrice are living in their beautiful apartment on the edge of the Bois de Boulogne with their children, 2 children. Fanny, who rides like her mother, and a son who wants to be a cabinet maker. And slowly but surely, day by day, there is that slow and then faster and faster taking apart of the identity, the rights, the freedoms of every single Jewish citizen in Paris, in Vichy France, the laws, the edicts, where you can sit, where you must get your yellow star, the roundups, the slow and then the faster taking apart of objects, possessions, the looting of your identity. The great portrait is taken from them, and then they are rounded up and taken to Drancy, that concentration camp on the edge of Paris, guarded by French guards. And you look at these cards, you think about those archives. This is where paper takes on a different identity. And here is Beatrice. And you see those last lines, par AA4J, which means that you are completely Jewish. Do not liberate, do not let go. Reinach crossed out de Camondo. And you see this for Fanny, the girl who loved to be on horseback. And you see here the son and the grandson, Bertrand. Here is the picture. And on the 20th of November, 1943, on Convoy 62, Leon, the composer, Bertrand, who wanted to become an ébéniste, who wanted to lay down lacquers and different kinds of wood into furniture, and Fanny are deported to Auschwitz. And on the 7th of March, 1944, Beatrice, on Convoy 69, is deported to Auschwitz and they are murdered. And the house, which was to be a memorial for a son lost in the First War, becomes this extraordinary, strange, powerful memorial for the whole of the family. And so I write letters. And I write letters to Moise about belonging. Who owns your belonging? I write to him about assimilation, what it is to cross a border and become a citizen of a new country and know that you belong. I write to him about mourning, about what it is to collect objects and try and hold them together, about diaspora, what it is to surround yourself with a collection of a place and objects. I write to him about being Jewish, and I write to him about our families, because these are my cousins. This is a house that my grandmother knew from visiting her cousins. And I write to him about food. He loved food, and I write to him about Chardin because he loved Chardin, and about objects, and about silence because I write to him letters to Camondo, and of course there is silence as he does not write back. And that is my new book, Letters to Him About Belonging. And Adam, my good, dear, long-lasting friend, you're here as a conversation to take me. And I don't know where we're going to go, Adam, but you are a man who knows Paris unlike anyone else. So here you are in the 8th arrondissement. And hello.
It's such a pleasure to be back with you again, Edmund, and to celebrate this extraordinary book, which I have here in the French edition. As I was teasing you before, when I read it in French, I was convinced that my friend Edmund could do anything, including writing
really not.
A book.
Really not. I have it in the language I wrote it in.
But I wanted to talk about so many things. You've laid out the content of the book and the structure of it so eloquently. Obviously, in one way, it's a book about a story that we know and we've heard told in many varieties. No matter how many times we hear it told, it never ceases to have the power to break our hearts. The last play I saw before the pandemic struck in prison dust for the past 14 months was Tom Stoppard's Leopoldstadt, which is a parallel work of art to your book in so many ways, a story of assimilation and tragedy. And the two things I wanted to start with was first to say to our listeners that this is not, though a book with a tragic subject, obviously, not a lugubrious book. It's full of all of your wonderful writing about Chardin, wonderful pages on Chardin, beautiful pages on objects, full of the delectation that we come to Edmund de Waal for, wonderful pages on dust. That was some of my favorite pure writing in the book, just about the appeal of dust and why dust is not a bad thing. This wonderful thing by Camondo where he talks about keeping vacuum cleaners away from the ambiguity of the vacuum cleaner, which is both desirable and not. And you talk so beautifully here, Edmund, about just one small thought it landed on is I'm not much of a one for the untranslatability of languages, but it did occur to me that poussière, the French word for dust, is so unlike dust.
I know, it's a beautiful word.
As so a word, exactly, that it elevates dust, Shakespearean dust, into another place. So I would hate for anyone to think that this is that this book makes for it certainly has a melancholic effect or tragic effect, but it is not melancholic reading. It's full of the vigor and life that you bring to everything. But it did seem to me, Edmund, that it once again comes to your central thematic preoccupation, and that is, for lack of a better way of putting it, the pride and pathos of objects. Yes. Because the thing that's so heartbreaking, deeply heartbreaking, is not just the story of betrayal and deportation and all. It's that the degree to which the whole Camondo family invested in objects as a kind of alternative to, not an alternative reality, but as an alternative reality in itself.
Yeah.
And that, that the objects would somehow guarantee or assure your position. Collecting beautiful things would do that. And of course, it ends up being a pathetic hope, not just because of the catastrophe of the Holocaust, of course, but just because of the catastrophe of mortality. Even if this not happened, Nissim, the house is built for Nissim, and Nissim dies in the war. It seems to me that infuses everything you write and everything you make.
I have one theme. You've got me, Adam. You've absolutely got me. I mean, you know, my epigraph is lacrimae rerum, the tears of things, you know, and it is absolutely what I keep coming back to, which is, you know, that in objects, the objects that we choose to surround ourselves, or the objects that we try and pass on to others, we are profoundly invested. They tell extraordinary, complicated and fissile stories about who we are, about identity. And so here is Moise de Camondo, and I'm glad you say it's not a lachrymose story, because here is someone who loves wine, he loves hunting, he loves being out, and but he loves objects, and he loves that particular moment in French culture where everything talks to everything else, where you can have a beautiful carpet on the floor, and you can have extraordinary furniture, and that nothing is quite what it seems. All the materials are veneered. All the materials are talking in a very cadenced way to each other. So to surround yourself with those particular objects, that particular moment, you know, you're saying something so beautiful and lyrical about who you are. I am French. I am a French person of this particular moment. But you're also saying, I am able to create a world, and I can pass it on. I can do this. You know, so what you've got is an extraordinary, extraordinary sense of the fragility of what you can pass on.
Yes. If your work has one theme, it's the pathos of possession.
Yes.
We believe that if we could possess enough, we can somehow turn back the waves of mortality and tragedy. And it turns out inevitably, in this case, through the intervention of a world scale catastrophe, but inevitably in any case, possession will turn to pathos sooner or later. I not to make the subject too journalistic, but I was something that was very much on my mind, and thinking about the Stoppard play, which for anyone who hasn't yet had
I will interject and say that I had a wonderful conversation with Tom on Sunday.
Oh my goodness!
Which was absolutely terrifing. You know,
I had no idea.
So
but I'd love to know what the substance of it was. One of the things that occurred to me, though, as an American Canadian Jew, with all of the perhaps too easy assimilation of the kind, but as someone who's lived in France for many years and has written about that experience in another way, it struck me. Let me see if I can put this well. In reading your book, once again, that to compare French Jews and British Jews, or the experience of the French and British Jews. I just did a piece about Lucien Freud not so long ago. And one of the things that's striking about the Freuds is, first of all, that they get out in time, which is one of the tragedies of the 30s. You keep, when one's reading a book like this, you want to say, pack up and go, just pack up and go. But also that there's and this is something you can speak about with expertise, and I can speak about only as an outsider. There's a sense that British Jews, on the one hand, had a much easier time. There's no history of, there's no Edmund de Waal in England. There's Chesterton and Belloc and so on, but they are of a less obviously poisonous and toxic kind. And Drummond, I mentioned Drummond because he plays a large role in this, in the book, the leading ideological anti-Semite of the time of the Dreyfus affair. At the same time, there's something about the Jewish love of French culture that seems to me far more, as you documented here, far more energetic, far more passionate in its appetite to be French. Yes. Whereas it seems to me, reading about Freud, reading your own work, thinking about Stoppard, that the British Jews sit at the edge of the culture in a slightly more way that's simultaneously less threatened and less passionately attached. Is there any truth in that?
Lots of truth. So let's take it apart, because there is an extraordinarily powerful identification that goes on particularly in this sort of milieu I'm talking about here in the Camondo book, that which says actually France is the new homeland for Jews. Right. It's this. Not only has Napoleon given us citizenship, and it's very interesting to be given citizenship. Very powerful conversation to have about that. But actually, but of course, it means that the Jewish population is part of a whole series of different and diverse. No one owns the whole of citizenship, any particular element of citizenship within France. We all own it. And so there is that extraordinary intellectual understanding of where Jewish culture might have come home in France. Speaking as someone who's with all the complexities of a refugee dad who came here in '39 and didn't ever really talk about being Jewish, but just had a very strong accent. The Englishness bit is very mixed up here, because my father's generation, the ones who escaped and managed to get here, became more English than the English. They really did. They really powerfully did. And I don't think they felt particularly called out on their Jewishness at all. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They really didn't. As you say, there was no Drumont driving public anti-Semitism on the streets of London.
Yes, and that's very thematic in Stoppard's play. It's not that he carries Jewishness around as a deep guilt. He doesn't know he's carrying Jewishness until it's brought to someone makes him realize it.
Yes, indeed. Stoppard talks himself as being being lucky the whole time, and then in Leopoldstadt, he really examines. He talks about the shadows right at the end of the play. He talks about the shadows of history and where they lie, and you really do feel that he's looking back over a very, very long career and going, how come I didn't work this out? How come this is happening? This play is happening when I'm 82.
Yes, exactly. And it did strike me too that the end of the play, in which there's simply kind of like a death knell tolling, the word Auschwitz occurs again and again as the Stoppard character realizes what's happened to this delightful assimilated family. The play begins with a Christmas tree with the Star of David on top of it, have been sent there. And it put me very much in mind of the power of those simple fiches that you reproduce here, 4J, meaning, capital J, meaning true Jew on all sides, do not liberate, do not release. And it made me think as well that something that's beautiful in this book is that the French and French Jewish obsession with the archive. One of the things that's beautiful in this book is that you find those extraordinary archives of the collection in those cedar closets in one room. And they have this strange chiming symmetry with what I called once the parallel paper universe in France, right? That where everything can be deferred to a bureaucratic ledger. And this is what happens to the family. So we can barely understand that the significance of those fiches is that they're death sentences. They're death sentences of the most horrible kind. And one of the things that's thematic for you in the book, I think, is the power of the archive and your fascination with the archive. Tell, if you would, Edmund, both about where you went, how you did it, where did you find those fiches, and how you feel about the archival imagination.
I kind of think, I make pots, I write books, but I think probably I'm just an archivist. You know, that's probably kind of, that's the, and certainly over, the years and years, Adam, as you know, when I was writing The Hare with Amber Eyes about my, first book, I really was just in archives the whole time. And finding, but both finding things, particular things in bits of synagogue like archives, but also in libraries, but then finding all the lacuna, all the spaces where there should be information and there isn't. So finding all the spaces where you would expect and need to find information. And powerfully hope to find information, and you just find silence. So archives are really fascinating because they talk profoundly to power, who own, who's looking after it, who puts things away, and who destroys those histories, who effaces, erases them. And so I guess when I'm in those archives, and they can be up in the servants' quarters in the Camondo or other Parisian archives, I'm conscious there of how much has survived, but I'm also, there are none of Beatrice's letters there. Where have they gone? This whole correspondence between, there are elements of these terrible letters where they're sort of pleading to have some of their objects back during 1944, 43, saying, we've given so much to France. You will remember how much we've given to France. And when you see those letters, you're conscious that this is only half the correspondence. So all the time, you're weighing up the absences alongside what you can discover, and then you have to write it, Adam. You really have to write it down.
Yes, but one has a beautiful sense of yourself as an explorer. One of the things that was, again, I use the word heartbreaking too frequently, but is those desperately pleading letters from during the war, and then the responses that they never saw, basically saying they're Jews, you don't have to do anything, and that even the head of the Institut de France never really went to bat. The people they thought would go to bat for them, as we would say, never really did in the French state. It occurs to me too, though, one of the things that fascinates me is that the letter from Proust that you discovered, as we both are obviously fanatic Proustians. I just did a long piece about Proust, and it speaks well for Proust's extraordinary tact and sensitivity that he writes a beautiful letter to Moise about when Nissim disappears, saying he may show up sain et santé yet, even though he certainly knew that he wouldn't. And it made me think about the kind of the compact, if you like, of those wealthy assimilated Jewish families who lived along the Rue Monceau. Proust not literally living there, but living not very far, not living very far off in various places. Talk a bit, if you would, Edmund, about that community and its particular kind of style, aesthetic.
Well, for a start, it's an extraordinary community because it happens very quickly. So it's, within a sort of a decade or 2 decades, there are all these families coming from the Levant or from Odessa or wherever. They
both
choose
Sephardic and Ashkenazi, though the family in question here is Sephardic.
Absolutely. And it's as you know, that particular area of France is, it's an opportunity to build yourself a big house, basically.
Right.
It's a new area, and so you can do it with a certain elan. You can really build big. But what you have is this. It's absolutely intertwined. Commerce, lots of money, but also hugely intellectual.
Just to stop you 1 second, Edmund, because where did the Camondo money come from?
Constantinople, banking in Byzantium.
It's
banking in Byzantium, exactly. Yes. but very, very rapidly. I mean, this is second generation arrival. They are not only buying extraordinary art, but running archaeological departments, or owning and writing the Gazette des Beaux-Arts, or commissioning Proust to do all your family portrait, Renoir to do all your Renoir, and then there's Proust. So so what you have very, very quickly is, of course, salon culture, which is something you've written beautifully about. So, which is in some ways the performance of culture in these streets. And my God, what a performance it is. But it touches music. It touches. It's no surprise to find that Leon, my grandmother's cousin Leon, is a not very good composer. It really, that's kind of perfect sort of sad fact. Of course, he's a composer. And then they all marry. I mean, as I sort of slightly wryly point out, Adam, in the book, I mean, everyone's a bloody cousin.
To you,
everyone turns out, and I think I say I know far too much of who slept with who in 1900. Too much information. So that's how it works. This great. And of course, there's that. And then, as you point out, the other side of that is all these families are brought together by this anti-Semitic press all the time. Mm-hmm. So they're always listed together and excoriated together.
As those who will never be truly French, who are pretending to be French.
Pretending to be French. Yeah.
Only in order to benefit the Jews, only in order to benefit each other, and they'll be up and gone the first time they can have it. Although it's a curious thing, and it comes up in the book, it certainly comes up in the life of Proust, that there was a way for French Jews, someone like Theodore Herzl saw the Dreyfus case as proof positive that there was no place for the Jews in Europe, that they would never be safe. But there was another way of reading it, which was the French state had ultimately come through. It was a long and torturous process, but finally Dreyfus had been vindicated. Yeah. The laws of laicity had been passed, and you could read it as an affirmation after a long struggle. And that's clearly very much the way they chose to read, all of those families chose to read it.
Yes, and you would have thought that. I mean, for God's sake, 1935, there is Camondo, he dies, he gives his house across, and all the other cousins have given their houses to France because they're grateful. And, the Minister of Education and culture, Jewish, the Prime Minister is Jewish, first Prime Minister.
Leon Blum, right.
Yeah, exactly. And so, why in 1935 would you think that you would want to leave France?
Yes.
Why would you want to leave France? And then in 1940, why would you want to leave France? Actually, but then, within 3 weeks, the first edicts are from Vichy, France, are from Pétain, from who you've been seeing at bloody cocktail parties, dinners for the last 20 years. So, that sense of betrayal, of an idea of who belongs in France is so profound. When I was writing about the Anschluss, that's one thing, because you kind of knew.
In Hare with Amber Eyes.
In Hare with Amber Eyes, because you knew that Vienna was shot through with anti-Semitism to its ends of its fingertips. But Paris, Paris sending French policemen to round up Jews in the Velodrome, and Paris, looting, systematic looting. I mean, Paris.
It was unimaginable for them. I was writing a long piece, which I intend to turn into a little kind of Duval wannabe book someday, called "The Ghost of the Glass House," about the Charot House, the subject of a wonderful exhibition at the Jewish Museum here in New York. The Delsasse family, the family of wealthy Jews who owned it, before the roundups, when they were asked to register as Jews in Paris, went off and did it because they literally could not conceptualize betrayal on the part of the French state. It was simply outside the range of their experience, as in ways that it might well be for Jews in New York. You simply cannot imagine that you would be surrounded by enmity, and they would do that. You know, it's.
So Adam, I've got to ask you this because you've lived in Paris much, far longer than me. So, the post-war reckoning, in my sense, has never happened.
Never.
So tell me about. I mean, because
there are two ways of looking at it, as there are with most things in the world, I suppose. One way is that it was an act of enormous amnesia verging on cowardice on the part both of the French state and on the part of the Republic and on the part of French Jews. But I remember very well, this is a strange story, but when we lived in Paris, we lived for a while at 16 Rue de Pré-aux-Clercs, 16 Rue de Pré-aux-Clercs. And the Rue de Pré-aux-Clercs in Paris is one of those odd streets that changes its name halfway down. So it begins as the Rue Saint-Guillaume and then becomes the Rue de Pré-aux-Clercs. So right next door to us was 16 Rue Saint-Guillaume. And that was the Maison Particulière of the David Vai family, one of the great French Jewish families. And whenever we would order a taxi, it would end up at their place. And they figured this out after a while, and very generously, they recognized that we were from America, and they invited us for lunch on the basis of the constantly annoying taxis that were coming for us and not for them. And I remember having conversation with this about them because they had been looted. Their house had been looted, and very little recovered. Some, as you know, some got recovered, a lot did not. It took over time. And their attitude was, and I remember being very moved by it at the time, was basically, we cannot live in those years. We cannot live for the rest of our lives obsessing about those years. They were tragic and they were terrible, but they were a moment in our history, and we cannot allow ourselves to reside there. And I know many French Jews who had exactly that feeling, that if you, it's a bit like Lot's wife. If you turn back and look at that, you will turn to stone. That's such a powerful mythological impetus that, and it comes up in your book in a different way. And because you say at one point, I don't want to hear about move forward. I don't want to hear, you use those very words, right? That it's sickening to be told to move forward. And when reading your book, this is a somewhat, it's a morbid parenthesis, but I can't help it. When we say they were deported to Auschwitz, we don't begin to grasp the scale of the horror. You mentioned in the book 3 days without water is part of it. But then you arrive, I just did a piece about Mengele not that long ago, and it's simply impossible to understand not just the annihilation, but the cruelty, the absolute sadistic cruelty that those poor good people went through in their last moments on earth. So this is to say that I have some understanding and some sympathy with the French Jews, whose feeling was very strongly that if we allow ourselves to inhabit that time forever, we will never live again.
So this is so significant and so significant. So, obviously, I think of my grandmother, my great uncle, who I was very close to. I write about in Hare and my grandmother, who very profoundly made a life in England, and a good life in England, and always remembered those of her family who had been killed. But I don't think ever forgave the Viennese, because she said it's not up to me to forgive them. But she didn't live in that moment. She didn't live in 1938. She lived, completely as your neighbors did in Paris. They refused to be trapped by that. But there is a need for this storytelling. There is an absolute need when you cross that courtyard in Camondo, Musée Camondo, to tell the story. You have to tell the story again, because it hasn't been told fully and it hasn't been told often enough. And because there are different kinds of absences at the heart of these stories that need to be explored and amplified. And it's not about forgiveness, and it's certainly, damn it, not about catharsis. And but and it's not about being owned by that particular moment, but it is absolutely imperative to return. It's an absolute imperative to return. I really believe that.
Yes, I think that's right, and it's such a complicated story too, because I went to Bordeaux to cover the Pepin trial, which was the only trial of a haut fonctionnaire who was directly engaged in the deportations. And of course, the key witness, the star witness, was Robert Paxton, a non-Jewish American historian who had gone back and done the essential archival work on what had really happened at Vichy in a way that no French historian would undertake at that time. Yes, as I say, but I don't want to. It's easy for those of us on this side of the water, American Jews, and it was one of the oddest moments of my life. Was we were settled in the courtyard at 16 Rue du Pré aux Clercs, and I forget now exactly how it happened, but somebody showed us across that somebody, a very friendly person in the building, had written to someone else saying, "Oh, a young Jewish family have moved into the courtyard." Now, my wife is not Jewish, but we were certainly, I'm no shame, and no one in the world could be more Jewish than I am. But still, it was sort of shocking to be identified that way. And it was a reminder of a certain side of a French life. If we had moved into New York, it would be, one of those horrible yuppie families that moved into the courtyard. No one would have singled us out for ethnic particularization, just for class condemnation at that time. But one of the things, and it's one of the complexities of the story you're telling, it seems to me, is what are we remembering? Because in one way, we're remembering betrayal and assimilation. On the other hand, and this is, I think, even more urgent for us at this moment, because one of the risks, as you know, Edmund, and I say this, I know, with some audacity, because it's not something that we like to say too often. It's very easy for American Jews to luxuriate, a funny word to use, in the sacrament of the Shoah, in the idea that if we regularly revisit it, that gives it's our Passover, and it's something we can visit and feel wounded by, and then use in a certain sense. But one of the things that's very powerful in your book, it seems to me, is the model of cosmopolitanism, which is a much more complicated concept. And that is that the Camondo family, though, as we've been talking for this past hour, were very assimilating. They built the Petit Trianon on the Rue Monceau. They collected French decorative arts and so on. Nonetheless, they called he called his son Nissim. He didn't call him even Nathaniel, or much less Jacques. They maintained very much that sense, and their lives in many ways, for me, are a vindication, not of assimilation, but of cosmopolitanism, the possibility of living in many places at once. And you say, and the closest thing you ever come to a moral or a message, not being a writer with messages, that you find no contradiction in the idea of being a native or a citizen of many, many cities at once.
Yeah. I mean, that's my last letter to him. Unanswered to him. I say, I'm, a quarter Dutch, quarter Austrian, half English, brought up in the Anglican faith, but Jewish and Quaker and a bit Buddhist. I say I'm a lapsed everything, Adam.
Yes.
But that I absolutely believe in this. In the vigor and the necessity of being able to move across borders, and be a whole human being. You don't leave part of you behind as you move. You don't have to. You're not necessarily wounded and fractured by that move. So, and you certainly don't have to be called out by nativist rhetoric, being told, you belong and you don't belong. You know, you're not authentically this, and you're impurely that, which of course is what's happening constantly, toxically at the moment. And so, you know, as you say, I don't do messages, but damn it, that is my message. I mean, that is my end. You know, it really.
It's what you write in the last letter in the book, and it seems to me terribly important. If you'll forgive me editorializing for a moment, because it's morally easy for us to embrace the Camondo family and their tragedy, but it's also more demanding for us to recognize that it's a tragedy of cosmopolitanism. In other words, that their ideal was not simply of belonging to one place, but to be several places at once and to feel those roots. And that is exactly as you say, that's the ideal that's under assault right now. It's under assault in England, it's under assault here. And though one of the lessons, I think, of your book is surely the affirmation of the positive side of the Jewish appetite for citizenship in particular places, it's also about the limits of one place and the necessity of feeling of belonging, the inevitability of belonging.
Exactly. And you know, to be able to talk about belonging is really important, and to be able to I mean, I hope celebrate belonging. You know, and I you know, sort of almost sort of in conclusion, I mean, you know, this is a book which absolutely, I hope, celebrates, you know, someone who really loved living. That's why I want to write to the man, is he absolutely loved the plurality of life, you know, the plurality of what it might mean to live in this place and to enjoy literature, food, and, you know, all these things. You know, and that is cosmopolitanism in a way that probably hasn't been kind of looked at and thought through for a while, but needs it.
Or sufficiently defended. You know, it seems to me that it's easy to defend identity. It's easy to see the experience of the European Jews as a lesson in not denying your identity, because your identity sooner or later will come and refuse to be denied. That's true, but it's also, it seems to me, a lesson in the eternal beleaguerment, but also the eternal benevolence of the cosmopolitan ideal. Anyway, that's the message I choose to take from it. Edmund, I know one of the things that was involved with this project was an art project that you did work as well.
I'm still, I mean, I'm sitting here in my studio. If I took you by the hand and we walked downstairs. So yes, there's going to be an exhibition at the Musée Nissim de Camondo begins in October, a year and a half delayed. And it's extraordinary because this is the first time since he died, 1935, that there's ever been anything changed or moved or anything contemporary in that space. So it's a really complicated and interesting challenge to bring anything into those spaces.
Not unlike, though, the challenge you had doing your installation at the Frick.
Yeah, bloody terrifying, both of them, absolutely bloody terrifying. So, you know, and so, yeah, and what do you do? What do you bring in? And you know, come and see. If we were allowed back into France by September, October, we have
reasons to go. So we will try and we will definitely be there, in fact, to see it. I will confess that though I lived in France and Paris for many years, I never went to the Musée Camondo. It's a little off the beaten track. One of the joys of Paris, of course, this is a subject you've written about, and I wish you would do a whole book devoted to it, Edmund, is the joy of the small eccentric museum. The Jacques Model.
Fine. I mean, you know, really, I'll do it. So I think our next date is probably, you know, given your extraordinarily storied, marvelous lyrical relationship with food, is for us to meet in a Parisian restaurant and continue the conversation, Adam.
I cannot imagine anything I would prefer. I'm already revolving the choices in my head. The one positive thing, I would be lying if I said the one positive thing, this pandemic in which Martha, my wife, who you know well, and I have truly not left the house except to walk the dog for 14 months, has been that there's having no choice. I've had to cook every night, and I've actually been in my friend Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours there. I've actually gotten to be better. So maybe we'll rent a kitchen someplace, and I will do for you my latest thing.
Thank you. I mean, that's just, you know, that's perfect.
Edmund, as I say, your work takes on the pluralism of possession and the pathos of possession in ways that no one else's does, and you realize it as art, and you realize it as writing, and all of us are grateful to you for the lyricism and the honesty of your vision.
Adam, you're a true friend and a wonderful interlocutor and a marvelous cook. So bless you. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy. Thank you.
100%.
Thank you. Thank you.